I know maybe you weren't planning on talking today, so feel free to use the chat. But we'd love to just open it up. Feel free to, we just got a couple people on the call. Feel free to unmute yourself and talk about kind of what you guys are facing and what you were hoping to get out of this webinar today. Don't be shy.
Okay, the silence is too much.
Yes, Wendy, we love it.
Just shut my door here. So yes, absolutely feeling all of them. And actually for us, we're moving to a new system right now, and just COVID and everything else. Just thought I liked the topic of the webinar and thought, well, if I could learn some things so I'm not feeling burnt out, that's fantastic.
Wendy, where are you calling in from?
White Rock, British Columbia in
Awesome.
Canada.
That's great. Taj is up in DC and I'm in Chicago. So we've got some Midwest, we've got some East, and all the way up there in BC. That's great. What new system are you bringing on board?
Thank you. It's new to North America. I think there's a few installations in the States right now. We're the first in Canada. It came from the UK. So it's a completely web-based system, huge learning curve. And it's also a new system, so it's kind of in development at the same time.
Oh, that's extra fun when you have a system that's not quite finished yet and you're trying to figure out how to switch to it. Yeah,
exactly. Spending all this time and getting no further ahead.
Yeah,
gets draining.
yeah. It's like you're just kind of hanging on with the systems you've got. And there's always this challenge when you move to a new system, right? It takes all this effort up front to get you to where you want to be, but often you're choosing a new system because you're already a little bit stretched. So that's tricky.
Awesome. Thanks for unmuting and breaking the seal for us, Wendy. Is there anybody else who'd like to talk about a problem they're facing, or just say that you're resonating with these 4 things, introduce yourself to the small group we got? Okay, cool. So I'm going to take us forward to get into the meat of, what are some things you can stop doing and what are some things you can start doing to kind of address this this burnout situation that you're facing. Taj, I think you have a little bit of a PSA about what this webinar is and what this webinar isn't related to practical tools versus what you might need to address your burnout from a mental health perspective.
Right. So we often think and read a lot about burnout in terms of what you can do personally. And, we are big fans of things like, self-care, meditation, taking a vacation, going for a walk, and all those things. So don't get us wrong. That's just not what we're experts in, right? So while we completely support you in doing those things, the things that we're going to be talking about are more strategic and systemic. So we're going to talk about the kind of things that you can do in your organization to have things flow better, to not be so overwhelmed, and in many ways to reduce what I'd like to call sort of unnecessary overwhelm. Things that happen that are just a little bit crazy making, that I think you'll all be able to relate to, and kind of how to deal with those. And some of it's about things to say no to, and other things, what to dig into, what to say no to, strategically, sort of for a longer term solve. So we don't want to have you think that we don't care about self-care. It's just not it's not exactly what our strong suit is. So please do that as well. Let me just pile some more on you. Please make sure to get that self-care done. That's really important. It kind of reminds me of when they have all these articles about insomnia and how bad it is for your health. And I'm like, great, now people are just gonna be up in the middle of the night, stressed out that they're not sleeping, and they're gonna die early. So we don't want to put that on you either. But yeah, just know that
I absolutely confess to doom scrolling insomnia articles when I can't sleep.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. And then you're awake and now you feel bad about being awake and now you're worried about your health because you're awake. And yeah, but I think everybody has a good sense of kind of the kind of things that would be helpful to them. But I'm hoping that our suggestions will give you some strategies to make that more possible, right? Because there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah. So skipping forward, the big PSA at the beginning, it doesn't have to be this way. So we know a lot of nonprofits that are experiencing burnout. There are things that you can do, practical things like Taj was just mentioning. It's not that you have to buy a software or you have to do a program or you have to do a thing. These are things that you can do. And we promise you can do them without buying something or doing anything like that. So to kind of kick us off a little bit, Taj, do you want to go into this one as we're getting started? And then, yeah.
So I'm going to talk to you about 3 things that we see, a few things, just 4 things. Sorry, I can't count to 4 today. You guys can probably relate. 4 things that we see a lot. And partially I want to tell you this is because, we've worked with hundreds of nonprofits, and to let you know that you're not alone, which you probably know from talking to other nonprofits, but one is firefighter mode. Firefighting organizations are organizations that are always dealing with like what's right in front of them, like what is in crisis, what is on fire, what's the emergency. And sometimes businesses function this way. And it's very different though, because they're not usually dealing with life and death situations and people's well-being the way that nonprofits are. So with nonprofits, like we often are talking to people who literally have to decide between, for us, right, I'm going to enter my data into this system and I've got a person in my door who's about to be homeless. Like it's a horrible decision to have to make. And so people are often kind of torn between like, what is the most important thing that I need to be doing? And also, even if, let's say you're in fundraising, right, and you're bringing in money and the organization has to have that money to function, and then cleaning up your fundraising database or having a difficult conversation with a board member or working on your strategic plan, that's a really hard thing to get your brain to switch to when you're like, we've got to get money in the door, we've got to get money, I've got to be calling donors, right? And so that firefighting sense is just, it's your brain just in a full on, if you've never heard about an amygdala hijack, look it up. Or if you've never looked, also David Rock's work on emotional intelligence sort of talks about the way your brain functions when you're kind of in this panic mode. It doesn't function very well, right? And so when everything's in crisis, it shuts down the part of your brain that is really good at planning. So it makes it really difficult for the organization to do strategic plans, to do data and evaluation planning, staffing plans, and I'm not even going to start on succession plans. Like that's even further down the road that your brain has to think. And so this is something that's really common and there's a good reason for it. So the next thing we want to talk about is sort of strings being attached. And this is something that is related to kind of how we relate to our funders. And we know that funders are really important and the work cannot be done without them. And they mean well. Like nobody shows up to give away their money to a cause like yours unless they actually care. But sometimes their agenda just doesn't quite match up with yours, right? So you've got foundations that give you money, but then there are expectations that you can't meet. And one of the things that we see a lot, and Derek, feel free to pop in here too as well. One of the things we see a lot is a lot of requirements on reporting, just for example. So we're going to give you $5,000, which might be a lot or a little, depending on your organizational size. And then we're going to make you collect, 15 different pieces of information, and you have to enter it into our foundation system, which is very difficult to use. And sometimes you end up wondering if the resources that you get are worth the distraction and the time and the effort to kind of meet those requirements. And then the more funders you have, the more complicated that gets. So, we've had people who had 8 or 9 or 10 funders, and they had to enter data into 8 or 9 or 10 places, and they have to then collect all that data. So then their intake forms that they collect from their clients get 12 pages long, and the thing just keeps building and building and building. So like you want more funders, but you don't want to have to deal with all that. The other thing that can happen is you can have a really big funder and you get sort of dependent on them, and then you start to kind of just subconsciously kind of do whatever they want. So we had a client, for example, and they were funding a pretty large initiative. They were a big chunk of the funding for out of school program. And the purpose of this program is this beautifully designed intervention that was designed to get kids successfully to the ninth grade, right? So there are these different components like, school health services and out of school time services and some tutoring for the kids. So then the funder comes in because they have this other initiative related to workforce development. And they're like, we want you to do workforce development and financial literacy training with the parents of those kids. So first off, it's so far removed. I mean, the funder sees it as really connected, but like all the staff know how to work with middle schoolers. All the staff are focused on out of school time and reading and math and tutoring and youth development. And like, this is where they live. It's a different skill set to work with adults around workforce development and financial literacy training. So, but they did it, right? So they had to find another partner. They had to, divert some of their staff to start working with the parents. And they understand that model of helping the parents they'll help the kids, but it just wasn't what they were built to do. And then just to make it extra fun, the funder came in and said, we want you to collect standardized test scores for the kids of the parents you're working with, not the kids that you're working with, but the kids of the parents that you're working with. And so now they've got this like crazy data collection burden on top of that. It was a big funder. They didn't want to say no to them. And it really just kind of derailed what they were doing and took them away from their sweet spot and where their strengths were. So finally on this, I want to mention volunteers, who we also love. We love our volunteers, but just we have to keep in mind that when you get a volunteer, they require a lot of training. And I'll use myself as an example. So I volunteer every Wednesday for the Alexandria Public Health Department, and I answer the COVID information line. So that's what I've been doing as my thing during the pandemic. And the first 3 times I went, I was less than useful to them. I mean, I was like, because I don't know how to work the phone system. I don't know how to answer the most common questions. I can't figure out all the info. There's this giant 3-ring binder you have to dig through to answer the question. So I kept being like, I have a question. So after about 3 weeks, I was useful because then I'm like, I kind of know the answers to most of the questions. I know where to find things. If I have a question, it's probably a good one now. But I'm painfully aware because of what I do that I was not so helpful for a little bit. But because of that, they're very particular about who they allow to work the hotline. And they kind of know that the first couple of weeks you're not going to be very useful, but they don't let people come and go. They want you to sign up and do the same day every week, which I think is really smart. And maybe it has fewer people, but the people are there. Like I see the same people every Wednesday when I go. So that's just something to think about as you're thinking about volunteers. And just, I give you permission to say, maybe this volunteer is not actually going to be as helpful. And yeah, so it's just something to think about. So then the next thing is what we call thinning the soup. So thinning the soup is a term that is, if you've ever been exposed to outcome budgeting, it's a term where you're doing more and more with the same resources. But I think especially in the nonprofit space, thinning the soup is very specific to your overhead, because people will keep giving you, hopefully, like in your best case scenario, people keep giving you money to provide services, but there's this reluctance around providing resources for overhead. And this is one of my chief bones to pick with people, with funders. Government agencies are actually a little bit better about this sometimes, which is interesting. But individual donors want everything to go to dollar programs and services, and funders, they want to know that you have very little overhead, right? So what you keep doing is, if you're growing, which you would hope to be, you're serving more and more people, but you've got that same one beleaguered executive director, you've got that same old payroll system, you've got that same part-time HR person, you've got those people just keep getting stretched thinner and thinner, because it's hard to get funding to upgrade your systems, to buy new software, to hire staff that handle the things that keep your organization healthy and running well. So that's something that's I really have a bone to pick. If you have not seen The Overhead Myth, it's a book, but it's also an amazing TED Talk. And if you haven't watched that, please do. You'll totally be able to relate to it. And finally, this is a gratuitous use of a picture of my own puppy, but Free Like a Puppy is what we call it around the office here at Insider. So Free Like a Puppy is, you don't have a lot of resources, or you're trying to stretch them. And so you're always looking for things that are free software, free staff, free services. Something that we see in particular, and Derek will talk about other types of things, but our experience is best in data systems, right? People who really want free data systems. So they go out and they want things, they're going to use things like Excel or Airtable, which are excellent tools. But Salesforce is a classic example of this, if you've ever used that. And so they're like, I'm going to use this because it's free. But, look at the size of the paws on that puppy, right? As it grows up, it's going to need more and more and more food. You're going to have to pay vet bills. You're going to have to train it. And while we don't have anything against free systems, and we often recommend them to people, I want people to really think about kind of what the unseen costs are, right? So you might have something that's free at a certain level, and then as you grow, the licensing fees might start to add up. I just talked to somebody who was using a vendor system, and they had paid thousands of dollars last year for a consultant because they couldn't get that system to create the reports that they needed. So think about whether something that's free is going to really do what you need it to do with the staff that you have, or if you might end up having to pay consultants or the vendor to actually fix it or get it to do what you need it to do. And Excel is also great. We use Excel. We often recommend Excel to clients, but sometimes people are doing everything in Excel, and then they're actually spending, like we've had a couple of different clients in the last year who spent a month out of the year. So one staff person spent an entire month every year just wrangling their Excel spreadsheets. And that's not free. So it's not that there's anything wrong with free, but really understand all the costs of something that is technically free. And then again, like, Salesforce is an example of kind of a higher end. It's free at a certain level for a certain number of licenses, but people often end up having to pay a lot to get it to work for them. So really think about your staff time on those those free things. So, I know this sounds dire, and I'm hoping that you're kind of being able to relate to this, even though that's painful, but we really do think that it can be better. And the things that we're going to talk to you about briefly is things that you can think about and act on right now. Not like it can be better because we hired a bunch of new people or we bought a bunch of new software or anything like that. We know people don't have the resources for that necessarily, but we're going to talk to you about some things you can do that's to help you strategically and to help you focus, and hopefully to lighten the load a little bit for you using the resources you've already got.
Awesome. So I'm going to start taking us through 3 things we can stop doing. And then after that, we'll go into 3 things we can start doing. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first one, which is avoiding mission creep. I thought this picture was so perfect because there's so much grass on the other side of this, yet still he's going for the grass on the other side. This seems obvious, I think, like, yeah, our core mission is super important. We don't want to stray from that. But I think we all, myself included with my own company, we can blur the lines sometimes. And, either a board member or a donor or someone sweetens the pot just enough to kind of convince us that we should take on a new project or run a new program that doesn't quite fit with our core mission. So why is that even a problem to begin with? I'm going to tell a quick short story. And I'm only going to tell you half of the story because the rest of the story is going to come into the point when we talk about what we can start doing. But here's a quick story from February of last year. It was right before the pandemic. We had no idea it was coming, and I was in Kenya. And I was working with a nonprofit that does clean water projects in Kenya. And just to give you an idea of the kind of state of affairs with clean water in East Africa, these women that you see here were walking 10 kilometers a day just to get water. And I don't have a picture of the water source up here for you, but it's dirty water with bacteria in it. So they're walking 10K a day just to get water that's not even clean and good for them. So that's why this organization exists. They want these women to have abundant lives and not to have to be getting water for their families, to feed livestock, just so that they can get by. So we were engaged with this team in East Africa. The nonprofit is based here in the US, but we flew to Kenya and to Ethiopia to work with these organizations to figure out how to put a plan together. They'd never had one in the 12 years that they were an organization. They had never put together kind of a strategic plan from the beginning. And really it was focused on this idea of how do we get sustainable earned revenue so that we're not always reliant on a foundation, a corporate funder, or someone to come in order to keep doing these programs. Because every time there's a 2008 or a pandemic and people in the US stop giving money, these organizations in East Africa and other places throughout the world all of a sudden don't have people donating to the programs and they're kind of stuck. So how do we make sure that that's not a risk, that our community there isn't going to be saying, hey, what happened to you guys? Because when something happens to you, then something happens to us. So the first idea that was thrown out was, let's buy a steamroller for $50,000. There's all of these construction projects around south of Nairobi, where these, in Kajiado County, where these, the people live. The steamrollers and the other heavy machinery is in short supply. So that seems like a great idea. We'll find some drivers and do this steamroller project. So what's the problem with that? Well, this organization does clean water. They don't know anything about steamrollers. They don't have engineers. They don't have drivers yet. They don't have anybody even connected to the construction industry. So not only that, but this isn't even affecting the same group of people, that their core mission is there to serve these women in these villages south of Nairobi. These steamrollers would be for construction projects up closer to the city. So what that ultimately ends up doing is their staff can't even do it. They would need all new staff. They might need new systems. They might need a building to put this steamroller in, or it's just going to go bad when it's sitting out in the rain during the rainy season. So the first thing we had to do was stop the mission creep. And Taj just put a great question into the chat, and feel free to drop answers into the chat. What, have you ever had a steamroller situation where somebody wanted you to do something that was just stretching you too far from your mission? And so the first thing is noticing these things when they come up. We're going to share a framework for how to look at that. And then I'll give you a start doing on the other side of what you can start doing. Our second one is really kind of related to the first one, and it's called Dodge Friendly Fire. The reason it's friendly is because it's usually people we love. It's our board members, it's our volunteers, it's our donors. We've got a great one in the chat, an organization working to end homelessness, and somebody wanted them to invest in strong tents for their clients. No, they need housing. Why are we looking at tents? Such a great one. Thank you for putting that into the chat. So yeah, these ideas a lot of times come from the people who are closest to us, and we don't want to damage the relationships. We want them to stay engaged. We feel like we're selling them on a daily basis why they should be involved with our organizations. So a lot of times it's them that's kind of shooting the arrows at us or handcuffing us into these situations. So sometimes though, that creates a project like that one we just talked about that's going to spread our staff too thin. So this is all about more of like the relationship aspects of like, how do we, with our relationships with our board members, with our donors, how do we change the dynamic of those relationships so that we can kind of dodge this friendly fire? And then we'll look at in the next section a way that you can actually channel that into something positive. I'm going to tell you a quick story. This one is kind of a tearjerker, so don't get depressed. We're going to talk about how to fix it later. But this is a short story about how when friendly fire can go really, really wrong. So this is an organization that is a historical society in the Midwest. They maintain 2 historic buildings. I mean, they were part of the Underground Railroad. So these are really important buildings to the history of not just this area, but all of the United States. And they have a $50,000 allocation from the city that they're in that goes to maintaining the maintenance of these buildings. These buildings are really old, so you can imagine the budget just to keep the lights on and do the electrical work that pops up every now and then, redo the roof. especially with historic buildings, can get really expensive. So the one helping hurts of this whole thing is they happen to have a board chair position on their advisory board that's a 1-year position. So that should draw some red flags right away. You want people on your board that are invested for the long term. So that was one thing that they needed to address. But they've got this board chair position, it's a 1-year appointment, and they had somebody who was an architect. And they were thinking about how can we serve the community even better as a historical society. I'm going to drop some plans for a building. Let's build a brand new building that can be this community center. We can move some of our artifacts out of these buildings and into this community center, and it can grow and have new space for the community. Now, withstanding, they didn't ask the community or the city whether they really wanted this building, but they struck a deal with the city to give up the $50,000 a year that they were getting in perpetuity from the city to take $300,000 today. This decision was pushed by the board chair, the executive director agreed to it, and they found land to do it. Well, how much did the land cost? $300,000. So they spent all $300,000 on the land. Now they don't have money to cover their maintenance budget for these historical buildings. And this land is going to cost at least another $100,000 just to get it ready to put a building on. So this isn't even covering the cost of the building yet. That's just clearing unsafe buildings that are currently on the property before they can even get started. So these are the kinds of things that can happen when you can't dodge friendly fire. So how can you change the dynamic of those relationships? This one was by literally restructuring what it means to be a board chair and how long you have to be invested in the organization in order to have that type of influence. But we'll talk a little bit more in the second part of this about what are some ways that you can change those relationships so that you don't put yourself in a position of having to go along with something when you're really defending the long-term mission of your organization. And here now they're in a really sticky spot. So I'm going to kick it over to Taj for our third example of what not to do before we get into some things that we can start doing.
It's about to get better, but just to break up the very sad story, we had to have our vacuuming dude here. So we're talking about data here, right? Sort of data mining versus data vacuuming. And what I'm referring to when I talk about data vacuuming is just taking in all the data that you can get your hands on, right? And this happens a lot. Sometimes we're so, and maybe this is us more than other people because we're data nerds, but sometimes we're so excited to be able to actually get the data that we don't realize kind of the burden of having more data than we need. So you've got to stop just like sucking up everything in sight, whether it's your Google Analytics or things from previous funders. Like often we find that people have old forms they don't actually need anymore. They're just collecting them out of habit. Same thing with fields. I mean, it takes time to go through and say, we don't need this form, we don't need this field. But again, it's one of those things that sort of pays off in the long term because then you can stop collecting it. And also, sometimes people are spending a lot of time running reports that nobody really is looking at or using. So you can go to the next slide, Derek. Thank you. I'll give you an example that we had. We were working with a federally qualified health center, and it was for student health services. So we're like, well, we'd kind of like to know how many kids got vaccinated. And they're like, great, we will share that data with you, which at first is wonderful, right? Because that data is not easy to get. We had to do a whole, a bunch of HIPAA stuff. We had to get a BIA agreement, but it was really important for us to sort of understand how many kids were getting vaccinated and what kind of health services. And then they just like dumped the whole data set on us that they use for billing the insurance companies. So it ended up being like a massive data set. And then each time a student would go in to get something, there were like 20 different pieces of data because, each one is a different ICD-9 code and, it's all really complicated. So we would spend hours and hours and hours just like sifting and sorting and organizing and transforming the data just to know how many kids were served and what did they get. And that doesn't even include the fact that a kid might go in for 4 or 5 or 6 different things, and then which thing do you count as you're trying to kind of report out to funders on the health services that kids got. So not saying that wasn't valuable data, but had we been able to work with the partners to say, can you just give us this? And that requires you to really think about exactly what do I really need? One of the things we say here all the time is nice to know is got to go. Like sometimes we just take it because we can get it, but really thinking carefully about, don't just vacuum up everything that's available just because you can get it. We've kind of gone from nobody could ever get any data to now we're like drinking out of a data fire hose sometimes with tons and tons of information. So kind of like with your free labor, you want to think about what the cost is of having more data than you either need or have the capacity to deal with. One is it becomes very hard to find what you need. Like you've got tons and tons of data, and unless you have a really amazing data management system, it's going to be really hard for you to really put your hands on what you need to answer questions. You may have a lot of incomplete data if you're just taking in everything regardless of the quality of it. So that's not very helpful. If you're storing it in the cloud, you're going to be paying for the extra storage cost to store data that you may not need or be using. And also there's like a lot of exhaustion and overwhelm that goes through, not only for the people who are trying to process it, but even for the people who are trying to use it. So if you can imagine getting this like giant stack of reports every month, if you're a nonprofit leader or being the person who has to produce this giant stack of reports, those really weigh heavily on an organization when they could be using their time and energy elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Okay, so with the things that we're going to stop doing, I just want to, looking back on that, reminding us that these are discipline things, and they take preparation, right? So you have to kind of prepare yourself to be able to defend against these things that are either temptations or things that people are suggesting that we love, so we want to help. Now let's get into some of the things that we can start doing now that we've prepared ourselves by stopping. So let's go to the first one, find your lane and own it. So this one is related directly to that avoid mission creep thing. So if we can avoid mission creep from the beginning, how do we sort of now find our lane into something positive that's not mission creeping? So let's tell the rest of this story. What did we end up doing in Kajiado County in Kenya? We looked instead at what does having new clean water in a community do for these Maasai communities south of Nairobi. Well, they have a lot of land. They have herds of cattle and goats. They're very used to working with agriculture projects. So instead we said, well, is this land actually able to grow crops, or is it not actually arable land? Well, it was. So instead, for people who are very comfortable already working with agriculture projects, and now they've got clean water, these women now are in control of fields that are growing crops. It's providing food security for that community. And then they're also selling food to a local school and to local markets. So they're actually providing healthy food, which is in short supply in this part of Africa, for a price. And they've actually now got a sustainable source of income on top of food security for themselves by doing a project that was more in line with their mission. So sometimes it's not that obvious what's in line with our mission, what's not in line with our mission, what's sustainable, what's not. So I wanted to do a quick case study. This is one of my favorite organizations here in Chicago called Brave Initiatives. Brave Initiatives helps young women build confidence by helping them look at social issues in their communities through coding. So they teach these young women how to code, and then they can build websites and build mobile apps that actually address real social problems in their communities. So this is a framework that was utilized so their organization is actually providing these, are a nonprofit, so they take money from donors and then they provide these programs. So this is a framework that was used for them to help think about how they could be more sustainable. So what you're looking at here is just a basic quadrant. On the vertical axis is core mission. At the top, is it core mission positive? Is this positive to our core mission? And at the bottom, is this actually like antithetical to our mission? And in the middle would be somewhere neutral. On the horizontal axis, we've got finances. So on the left, we're taking money from donors. On the right, we're actually earning money. So nonprofits typically live in this top left part of the quadrant. That's where historically they've been. We do mission positive things. We use donor money to do it. These are not earned revenue situations. This is using donor capital in order to achieve our mission. People most often try to tempt us to go down to this bottom right-hand quadrant. And it's okay to have some stuff here, but this is not really where you want to spend your time. So these are things that earn money, but they're drifting away from our core mission. So these can be steamrollers, right? These can be things that really stretch our staff too far. Sometimes there are things that live here that might be okay doing. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is where you really want to look. If you're looking to have an earned revenue strategy as part of your nonprofit, this is where you want to go. These are things that are really aligned with your core mission and they earn money. Where you never want to be is this bottom left-hand quadrant, which are things that are not in line with our mission, and they also take donor money to do them. Some of those things that look like they're in the bottom right-hand quadrant very quickly become things that end up in the bottom left-hand quadrant because we actually weren't equipped to do that project well. So what did this look like for Brave Initiatives? So here's where they've been at the beginning when they got started. They're doing inner city coding camps and they do it at a subsidized cost. So they're taking donor money in order to do those camps. What a very mission aligned thing for them to do was they realized their coding camps are really, really good. And it's not just women in the inner city that need to learn how to code, it's women everywhere. So they started providing coding camps in the suburbs where people could pay, where they were resourced communities that were able to pay full price. And it actually turned out that doing one of these camps in the suburbs was actually able to subsidize the cost of 2 camps in places where the neighborhoods were more under-resourced and didn't have the ability to pay for the programs. Now, they do have, in full disclosure, a couple of what we'll call the Make the Donors Happy camps. We don't want you to do this. But we understand that sometimes it's impossible to live within a rigid framework. So they had about 3 or 4% of their programs that ended up in this bottom right quadrant, which was where, hey, we've got somebody who's willing to back a program in Seattle. It's not part of our core territory, so it kind of feels like it's outside of our core mission, but we have the staff to do it. They're not going to be stretching. They really actually had to analyze that. Like, is this going to stretch our staff too much? Are we going to be asking people to do things they can't do? Are there going to be traveling costs? All of those kinds of things. Ultimately decided that it was worth the partnership. And so they do have some things in the bottom right, but do not live there. You want to live in the top half of this quadrant. And then the last thing, this is what they could have gotten tempted to do that they did not do very astutely, but it took kind of looking at it analytically. When they decided to do these camps in the suburbs, they didn't do them at a subsidized cost. They could have said that coding is something that everybody needs, let's subsidize it everywhere. But with this framework in mind, they were able to say, hey, that actually takes us resources and it's not in our core mission, which is really focused on these under-resourced areas. So quick commercial, I'm gonna go through it really fast because this is not a sales webinar. This is what we do. So if you're looking for help for this kind of thing, there's a link down there in the bottom right-hand corner, which is just our website, oncenterconsulting.com, Jumpstart program. We've got 3 organizations in a cohort right now. They're having really transformational results. We're starting the next one in July. So if this is something you're interested in, for sure, reach out to us. Okay, our second thing to start doing is actually learn when to say no. So before we do this really fun video that we have for you, this is one that we get a lot because nobody likes to be told no. And we love our board members and our volunteers and our donors. We don't want to tell them no. So what's a different way to set up that conversation? And it's actually to invite their ideas into your strategic planning process. Because I think when they start to see that you've got financial scenarios, you've got funding and earn revenue, and it's in a timeline of when you can do certain things and when you can't do other things and how many staff it takes to do specific things. You'll be able to paint the picture for them of what it truly would take to take on this project. And you can actually then use that to get them excited about the goals that you do have in place, rather than drifting into these other ideas that they might have. So it's really about bringing them into your mission and not letting them kind of bring you into theirs. So Taj queued us up a really fun video, because this is just like how this feels all the time. So I'm gonna just go ahead and play it. Taj, do you have an intro for it, or do you just want me to hit
Yeah,
play?
this is a clip from a video. I highly recommend you watch the whole thing, which is if we ran nonprofits, if we ran a pizza shop like we run nonprofits.
All right, I'm gonna hit play. So I, like Taj said, I would recommend watching the rest of this video, because you'll just get a laugh, because you're just going to see yourself in this woman as she's confused, as different people come in and say what their expectations are, in order to participate in her pizza shop, which is effectively your mission. Another thing we love doing to help equip people to say no is being intentional about going out into your communities and collecting stories. We teach people to do what's called an in-context interview, which is something actually people do in Silicon Valley when they're doing product research. So they want to launch a new product, and they have to get out there and get unbiased resource or feedback. A lot of times when you're doing something new or you have a program, all the people closest to you like kind of lie to you. They don't do it on purpose. They just love you. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love your thing. It's so great. Like, get out there and do it. And they're just trying to be supportive. So we have a way of training people to actually collect unbiased feedback, which we can help you do. But honestly, if you just go get coffee with people for 30 minutes, think of 10 people that your program impacts and go get coffee with them for 30 minutes. If they're not coffee drinkers, find another way to link up. Obviously, wear your masks until we're out of this thing. But that's a way to arm yourself with information, collect insights from those. It's going to feel like just a conversation to the people you're getting coffee with, but it's really an interview. You're learning about why they need what your program is providing. And then when somebody comes to you and has all of these crazy ideas, you can bring up the stories that you now have about how your program is really impacting people and say, if we do that, like, we're not gonna be able to do this anymore. And these are the needs that they have. That's where we need to expand, because they've got new needs that we're not able to cover. What if we expanded into that need that's in the same segment, that's something we're equipped to provide that we don't have the resources for? So can I get you excited about that instead? Sometimes also people just want something now. And when you say you can't do it, it feels like you're saying no, but really you're saying like no for now. That's another part of the strategic planning process, where if you can put together a map that shows when things are taking place, you can say, yes, Jeff, thank you for that idea. I actually think that's a program we might be able to do in 2025. We'd like to put it on our long-term roadmap as something that we're going to be working towards. But you just got to know for the next 3 years, we're not going to have any resources to actually chase after that right now. So no for now, and showing them that you actually listen to them is a lot easier and better way to kind of say no to somebody without totally shutting them down. And then I'm going to kick it back over to Taj about digging deep with your data.
Yeah, so I'll go through this pretty quickly because we've just got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have some time at the end in case people have specific questions. So the opposite of vacuuming is mining, right? And so the way we want to think about this, and again, these are things that you can do with the resources you have, but we do understand they take a little bit of time. So first off, like really talk to people, back to the interviewing again, right? Really talk to people in your organization about what the most important information is. What do they really care about? What are they really using? What is the most valuable information that you should be spending your time on? So invest in your best data and be willing to let the rest of it go. The next thing I like to think about is sort of treasure hunting, right? So finding out where all your data is, because if you're like most organizations, it might be a little bit all over the map. So sometimes that means you've got a bunch of different systems, vendor systems, and then somebody built a little custom access database, and then somebody over here has a few spreadsheets. They can all hold really valuable information, but kind of figure out where it all is. Figure out where to find it, who's in charge of it, what format it is, and really map everything out so you know where it is, which will really help you when you need to find things and you want to document that and when you can bring that together. So the next thing is understanding your reports. So most people have to create reports, even if you're just running things in Excel, using spreadsheets, or even pen and paper, just counting files. But again, sort of really know what's important and who it's important to. Now you know where it lives and what do you need to get out of it. So make sure you're not running reports that nobody's reading or using, and push hard on this. Like if this person gets this report every month, really ask them, like, what are you doing with this? Like, what kind of decisions are you making? Is this the information you actually need? And really sort of push on that, and don't be shy about it. Anything you can take off your plate in terms of data that you collect, have to clean, have to process, has to report, is going to give you more bandwidth to focus on what's really important. A lot of times people collect a whole bunch of different stuff, but none of it's really clean or complete. And so they don't have any really good data, but they've just got a whole bunch of it. So the next thing is document your reports. This is so boring, I know. But if you're creating reports again and again, I don't know if you're like me, but if I've slept since then, I go to do the report and then I'm like, how did I run this last time? And especially the more complicated it gets. And again, even just pulling spreadsheets together. So once, just sit down and write down, these are the steps I go through to create this report. This is who has it. This is how I get it. This is what I do with the columns. This is how I clean it. This is how I organize it. This does two things. One, it will save you mental space next time that you need to run that report. But the other thing is it makes it easier for you to hand it off. So if you have turnover or you just want more than one person to be able to run the report, so it's not that one special person who has it all in their head, it makes it easier to kind of share the wealth and say, okay, here's how you do it. Now you can run the report, or your successor can run the report. The next thing you can think about and do in the short term is there's a process that we call the impact blueprint. So this is the thing that we offer to a lot of people who either have data all over the place and they really want to get a handle on it. It's also really helpful if people are getting ready to, like Wendy mentioned, like move to a new system, but they're not quite sure exactly what they need out of their organization or their data, or what they need that system to do. There's 3 steps to it. First is we interview key stakeholders to sort of answer those key questions about what's important. Then we do the inventory to figure out where everything is and what kind of format it's in. And then we help people kind of document what their reports are and what their reporting needs are. So if you're interested in any of this or learning a little bit more about how you might do it yourself, you can go to our website, which is just insider.io. And you can see that you can schedule a free consultation. So we're happy to talk to anyone for an hour and just help them figure out some steps that they can take to do these 3 things, or sort of move along that. We're also doing a workshop at Good Tech Fest. So feel free to just post in the chat if you're interested in that. That's a 3-hour workshop that we're doing in May as part of Good Tech Fest. So if you're also interested in the Impact Blueprint, you can come there and we'll work through that with your organization. So yeah, I will say that this one, I think, is back to you, Derek.
All right. Yeah, so this is just summarizing very quickly 3 things you can stop doing, 3 things you can start doing. Avoid mission creep, try to dodge that friendly fire, and be intentional about what kind of data you're bringing in. Mine, don't vacuum. And then our start is finding that lane, find that lane and own it. Use that quadrant to make sure you're not going outside your lane. Know when to say no lovingly to the people we love that are part of our organizations, and then really dig deep on those data points that really do matter to you once you've kind of stopped sucking up everything in sight. So with that, I wanted to make sure, we got a few minutes for questions here towards the end of the time that we had. We want to make sure you all had a chance to ask them or to get anything out. We've been chatting with several of you on the side. So I'm going to stop talking and give everybody a chance to open up and ask any questions that you might have.
Yeah, hi, and this is Jennifer. Can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Jennifer.
Okay. All right. Hi, good morning. I'm not on video because I'm on the West Coast and it's still kind of early, or I've been up for like 3 hours, but I'm still in my bathrobe. So
no judgment.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. As a federal contractor, I've been living in these situations for years and years and years. It's a different kind of client, but we still end up with the same problems of, can you do more and more and more for the $10, that we gave you? And I think too, I'm also in the process of sort of doing a lot of data mining and doing exactly what you've talked about, which is, figuring out what data we have, how to use it. And so a lot of what's been on this webinar, I think has been helpful. It's just kind of confirmed kind of what I already thought I knew. And it's given me a few different ways to kind of think about things too, that I can share, with my team. So thank you. It's much appreciated. Great.
Awesome. Thanks for coming today. And thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think we hope that these are just like some first steps to think. And I think just like knowing that it's not supposed to be that way. I think we get lulled into this thing of working with nonprofits, or kind of in the situation that you're in, that like, we're doing charitable things, so therefore we have to be charitable with everything and give everything of ourselves in order to kind of earn the dollar from somebody else or earn participation. It's not supposed to be that way. I donated money to a nonprofit that I care a lot about. And it was weird. They called me and said, hey, this was kind of a lot of money. Like, what do you want us to do with it? And I was like, oh my gosh, what have we done? I'm like, you need to do with it what you think you should do with it. You're leading the organization. If there's a program you need to do, if you need to pay yourselves, do it. This is for you. I believe in what you're doing. And I cannot give you strings, especially I'm out here preaching where there shouldn't be strings. I need to make sure I'm not, putting strings on somebody else. So yes, it does not have to be this way, Jennifer. And hopefully we've armed you with a couple things to start addressing some of those situations.
And we know it's not effortless, right? We know that these things take time, and this is always the catch-22, right? Like, you're really underwater, but then it takes a little bit of time to sort of go through some of this process. It takes effort to change things, and it takes effort, but we really have seen good results from this. And if you can carve out a little bit of time to kind of filter through and say what to say no to or what to dig deeper in, it does really help in the long term.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would focus on one, right? What's one situation or one of these disciplines to kind of look at? And once you get more comfortable with that and start seeing results, then maybe look at some of the other ones. It's hard to do all of them at the same time. Any other questions or comments kind of sitting on the tip of somebody's tongue? Well, I think with that, we can probably wrap up. It is the top of the hour. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time and let you get on to the next thing that you've got going on. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We know that people have Zoom fatigue, and there's anything you could be doing with an hour of your time. So it's been great to talk with you all a little bit, get to know you a little bit, and what some of the things are that you're facing and some of the great things you're doing in the world. So thanks for spending time with us. If you have any questions, there's a link right there that you can get in contact with Taj. And then I shared a link with y'all earlier but you can just Google Derek Kessin on center, you'll find me. And there's an easy way to get in contact with me there.
Great. Thanks, everyone.